happened. Let me just read it for you. John 8, verse 1, verse 2. Early in the morning he came to the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. Now look up here for a second, because they lied. That is not what Moses said. Moses did not say if someone was caught in adultery in the very act that the woman should be stoned. Moses said they both should be stoned. But the guy's nowhere around, which tells you this is a setup. What do you say? Verse 6, they said, testing him that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger as though he did not hear. Look up here again. I don't know how many people I have heard go overboard trying to explain what Jesus wrote on the ground in verse 6. Do you know it doesn't matter? Who cares what he wrote? If he would have wanted us to know what he wrote, he would have told us. It would have been right there in verse 6, don't you think? It's a pretty big Bible. It wouldn't take a lot of ink just to say, and Jesus wrote. So it doesn't matter what he wrote. Okay, don't bother with that at all. Doesn't matter. He'd have told us. Verse 7. That's not the point of this. When they continued asking him, he raised himself up and he said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And again he stooped down and he wrote on the ground. Well, what did he write that time? Don't know, don't care. Verse 9, then those who heard it, not those who saw it or read it, but those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last. Jesus was left alone, the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? And she said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Do you realize what Jesus did? Do you realize the blatant display of agape love in John 8? Jesus Christ took this lady who was caught in the very act of adultery, and He didn't hide her sin. He dealt with her sin. It was dealt with, but He protected her dignity. He protected her dignity. I don't know if you've ever noticed as you read through the Gospels at the extreme care with which Jesus Christ dealt with ladies. Have you ever noticed that? He'd get right in the Pharisees' face. He'd just give them fits, but He was never anything but tender and kind. He never rebuked a woman. Never. And this lady, a great sinner, and He protected her dignity. And then He sent her away restored. Now, it's not in the text, but I just have a feeling, if you'll permit my imagination for a second, I have a feeling she never committed adultery again. What do you think? I think that was it for her, because Jesus forgave her, protected her dignity, covered that sin, and sent her away changed. And said, don't do that anymore. Don't do that again. So the very first fruit of the Spirit is love. Do you have it? Do you have it? How well is it developed in you? Well, how do I know? Well, here's a great question. What's your attitude towards sinners? What's your attitude towards sinners? How do you feel about sinners? Do they annoy you? Do they make you angry? Or do you feel this compassion to cover their sin if it's been repented, certainly, and even if it hasn't? Do you want to see them pay, or would you rather see them come to Jesus? What's more important to you when someone you know sins, punishment or restoration? You know, Galatians 6:1 says, if a man's overtaken in a fault, in a trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Agape love covers sins. Let me give you one more. This one's hard. This one's tough. Can you handle tough this morning? Can I give you a tough one? Let's see how we do on this. Agape love seeks the good of others no matter what they have done to us. It seeks the good of others no matter what they have done to us. It means that no matter what people may do to us by way of insult or injury or humiliation, we will never seek anything but their highest good. William Barclay is a great commentator of years gone by. He said, agape love describes the deliberate effort which we can make only with the help of God, never to seek anything but the best, even for those who seek the worst for us. Told you it was tough. Agape love. Remember I said this fruit is not natural? It's not natural in us. It can't just be conjured up to fool people. And this is a good illustration of why that's true. It's not natural for anyone to be like that. It's just not. If someone steals your wallet, I promise you, your first thought is not to send them $100 because they obviously needed the money, huh? No. If someone picks a fight with you, beats the living daylights out of you, your first thought probably is not to find them a good Christian counselor because they obviously have anger issues they haven't been able to conquer. If your child wakes up dead, winds up dead because someone was drunk and got behind the wheel, your first thought's not going to be to figure out why they feel like they need alcohol to manage their life. That's not natural for any of us. Let me give you the greatest example of agape love you'll ever hear. Take just a couple of minutes with me now, and let's go to a pretty gruesome scene. It's taking place outside of the old city of Jerusalem. And there outside of that city is a hill, and on that hill, on this particular day, 3 criminals are being executed for their sins. Now there are 3, so there's one in the middle and one on either side. And those 2 guys on the outside, on either side there, they are being justly executed. They deserve what they're getting. But that one in the middle, he's called a criminal, but the truth is he's never done anything wrong. In fact, the only reason he's on that cross on this day is just because they hate him. It's just because they hate him. Nobody has proven anything that he's ever done or said. They just hate him. And before he's gotten to that cross, they hate him so badly that they've mocked him. They've ripped his clothes off of him. He hangs there naked. They've pulled out his beard. Imagine what that would feel like. He claimed to be a prophet, and so they blindfolded him, and they would walk by and slap his face and laugh and say, if you're a prophet, just tell us who slapped you. Well, he wasn't there to play their games. He had claimed to be a king, so they had made this crown of thorns, with thorns probably that long or longer, and they had smashed that crown of thorns down upon his head. Excruciating pain. Have you ever bumped your head? There's very little pain in the human body that hurts quite like an injury to the head, and they had just crammed that on his head and beaten it down. They had hung him up in the city square by his wrists and exposed his back. And they had taken a cat of 9 tails, which was a long whip, and in the end of it they had pieces of leather that went off from the main trunk of that whip, and in that leather was embedded rock and pottery and bone. And 39 times they had struck him, pulled that back, and every time they pulled that whip back, it would just literally rip his flesh. What a lot of people don't know is that it took 2 people to enact that kind of a beating. One of them was so skilled in working that whip that it didn't kill the person, and the second person just watched to make sure the person didn't die, because as soon as they were near the point of death, they would stop. All of that had been done to him, and then they had stretched him out, and they had put nails in his wrists and nail through his feet and ankle, and they had hung him on that cross. And the entire day this has gone on, he really has said nothing. He has kept to himself, bearing this excruciating torment. But all of a sudden now he's hanging on that cross, and we think we hear him say something. He actually said 7 things that day from that cross, but one of them catches our ear like nothing we've ever heard. And you know what he said, don't you? He looked to heaven and he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Are you kidding me? Forgive them? Forgive them? They don't know what they're doing, insinuating that had they known who He was, they would never have been doing what they were doing. Father, forgive them. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is agape love. Because they were out for the worst they could do to Him. And yet Jesus Christ, hanging on that cross, was only interested in their good. Romans 5:8 says it very clearly. God was demonstrating His own love toward us